The long and the short of it from Storylink Radio. 2 versions of the same story. The long version is the entire original work, while the short version is the original book, just squeezed down to a listenable short story. Be sure to look on our channel for both versions. Read along with the story for fun and literacy enhancement. If you are a student, welcome. You just found a great way to learn and experience all that stuff you're supposed to know. Enjoy. Check the description for study notes. If you are a library or educator, please contact us for ways we can help your mission for free. And now, the short version of our story. Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey, also in the Gothic genre, more or less, more satire on Gothic perhaps. This was Miss Austen's first completed novel, but it was the last of 2 novels published posthumously along with Persuasion. We're drawing tonight on the amazing editing work of Mr. Glyn Hughes from a place called Squashed Books. On to Northanger Abbey, 1803 by Jane Austen, published in 1817. By way of introduction here, Catherine Morland is one of 10 children of a country clergyman. Although a tomboy in her childhood, by the age of 17, she is in training to become a heroine, and is excessively fond of, obsessed with, reading Gothic novels, among which Anne Radcliffe's Mysteries of Udolpho was a favorite. As our story begins, Catherine is visiting Bath with a pair of family friends. Now, lest we be confused with some strange cleanliness rituals, this is the city of Bath in Somerset, England. Now, while in Bath, the city, she meets 2 different families, the Thorpe family and the Tilney family. Due to her relative naivete and her love of the Gothic, Catherine Morland expects and seeks for Gothic intrigue around every dark corner in the Northanger Abbey, with at times humorous and at times tragic results. Part 1. A Heroine in the Making. No one who had ever seen Catherine Morland in her infancy could have supposed her born to be a heroine. Her situation in life, the character of her father and her mother, her own person and disposition were all equally against her. Her father was a clergyman without being neglected or poor, and a very respectable man, though his name was Richard, and he had never been handsome. He had a considerable independence besides 2 good livings, and he was not in the least addicted to locking up his daughters. Her mother was a woman of useful plain sense, with a good temper, and what is more remarkable, with a good constitution. She had 3 sons before Catherine was born, and instead of dying and bringing the latter into the world, as anybody might expect, she still lived on, lived to have 6 children more, to see them growing up around her and enjoy excellent health herself. Catherine, for many years of her life, was as plain as any member of her family. She had thin, awkward figure, sallow skin, without color, dark, lank hair, and strong features. Well, so much for her person, and not less propitious for heroism seemed her mind. She was fond of all boys' sports, and greatly preferred cricket, not merely to dolls, but to the more heroic enjoyments of infancy, nursing a dormouse, feeding a canary bird, or watering a rose bush. Indeed, Catherine had no taste for a garden, and if she gathered flowers at all, it was chiefly for the pleasure of mischief, at least so it was conjectured from her habit of always preferring those which she was strictly forbidden to take in. Ah, yes, such were Catherine's propensities. Her abilities were quite as extraordinary. She never could learn or understand anything before she was taught, and sometimes not even then, for she was often inattentive and occasionally stupid. Her mother wished her to learn music, and Catherine was sure she should like it, for she was fond of tinkling the keys of the old forlorn spinet. So at 8 years old, Catherine began. She learnt a year and could not bear it, and Mrs. Morland, who did not insist on her daughter's being accomplished in spite of incapacity or distaste, allowed her to leave off. The day which dismissed the music master was one of the happiest of Catherine's life. Her taste for drawing was not superior, though whenever she could obtain the outside of a letter from her mother, or seize upon any other odd piece of paper, she did what she could in that way by drawing houses and trees, hens and chickens, all very much like one another. Writing and accounts Catherine was taught by her father, French by her mother. Her proficiency in either was not remarkable, and she shirked her lessons in both whenever she could. Yes, what a strange, unaccountable character! For with all these symptoms of profligacy at 10 years old, Catherine had neither a bad heart nor a bad temper, was seldom stubborn, scarcely ever quarrelsome, and very kind to the little ones, with few interruptions of tyranny.
She was noisy and wild. She hated confinement and cleanliness, and she loved nothing so well in the world as rolling down the green slope at the back of the house. Yes, yes, such was Catherine Morland at 10 years old. At 15 years old, appearances were mending. She began to curl her hair and long for balls. Her complexion improved. Her features were often softened by plumpness and color. Her eyes gained more animation. Her figures more dances. Her figure more of consequence now. Her love of dirt gave way to an inclination for finery. She grew clean and she grew smart, and she had now the pleasure of sometimes hearing her father and mother remark on her personal improvement. From 15, indeed, to 17, Catherine was in training for a heroine. She read all such works as heroines must read to supply their memories with those quotations which are so serviceable and so soothing in the vicissitudes of their eventful lives. So far her improvement was sufficient, and in many other points she came on exceedingly well, for though she could not write sonnets, she brought herself to read them, and though there seemed no chance of her throwing a whole party into raptures by a prelude on the pianoforte of her own composition, she could listen to other people's performances with very little fatigue. Catherine's greatest deficiency was in the pencil. She had no notion of drawing, not even enough to attempt a sketch of her lover's profile, that she might be detected in the design. There she fell miserably short of the true heroic height. At present she did not know her own poverty, for, well, Catherine had no lover to portray. There was not one lord in the neighbourhood, no, not even a baronet. There was not one family among their acquaintances who had reared and supported a boy accidentally found at their door. No, not one young man whose origin was unknown. Her father had no ward. The squire of the parish had no children. But when a young lady is to be a heroine, the perverseness of 40 surrounding families cannot prevent her. Something must and will happen to throw a hero in her way. Now, Mr. Allen, who owned the chief property about Fullerton, the village in Wiltshire where Mortland family lived, was ordered to Bath, the city, for the benefit of a gouty constitution, and his lady, a good-humoured woman, fond of Miss Morland, and probably aware that if adventures will not befall a young lady in her own village, then she must seek them abroad, invited Catherine to go with them, and Mr. and Mrs. Morland were all compliance, and Catherine all happiness. Part 2. The City of Bath. When the hour for departure drew nigh, the maternal anxiety of Mrs. Morland will be naturally supposed to have been most severe. But Mrs. Morland knew so little of lords and baronets that she entertained no notion of their general mischievousness, and was wholly unsuspicious of danger to her daughter from their machinations. Her cautions were confined to advising her daughter to wrap up well when she came home from the rooms at night, and to try to keep some account of the money she spent. Sally, or rather Sarah, must, from situation, be at this time the intimate friend and confidant of her sister. It is remarkable, however, that she neither insisted on Catherine's writing by every post, nor exacted a promise of transmitting the character of every new acquaintance, nor a detail of every interesting conversation that Bath, the city, might produce. Everything, indeed, relative to this important journey was done on the part of the Morlands with a strange degree of moderation and composure. Catherine's own father, instead of giving her an unlimited order on his banker, or even putting £100 bank bill into her hands, gave Catherine only 10 guineas and promised her more when she wanted it. The journey was performed with a suitable quietness and uneventful safety. They arrived at Bath and was soon settled in the comfortable lodgings on Pulteney Street. Mrs. Allen had not beauty, genius, accomplishment, or manner. The air of a gentlewoman, a great deal of quiet, inactive good temper, and a trifling turn of mind were all that could account for her being the choice of a sensible, intelligent man like Mr. Allen. In one respect she was admirably fitted to introduce a young lady into public, being as fond of going everywhere and seeing everything herself as any young lady could be. Dress was her passion, and our heroine's entree into life could not take place till after 3 or 4 days had been spent in providing her chaperone with a dress of the newest fashion. Catherine, too, of course, made some purchases herself, and when all those matters were arranged, the important evening came which was to usher her into the upper rooms. Yes, but nothing happened that evening. Mrs. Allen knew nobody there, so Catherine was unable to dance. A day or two later, when they had made their appearance in the lower rooms, the fortune was more favourable to our heroine. the master of the ceremonies introduced her to a very gentleman-like young man as a partner. His name was Tilney. He was a clergyman. He seemed to be about 4 or 5 and 20, was rather tall, had a pleasing countenance, a very intelligent, lively eye, and if not quite handsome, was very near it. His address was good. He talked with fluency and spirit, and there was an archness and pleasantry in his manner which interested, though it was hardly understood by, Catherine. Catherine felt herself in high luck, and they parted, on the lady's side at least, with a strong inclination for continuing this acquaintance. But when Catherine hastened to the pump-room the next day, there was no Mr. Tilney to be seen. Instead, Mrs. Allen had the good fortune to meet an acquaintance at last in the person of Mrs. Thorpe, a former schoolfellow whom she had seen only once since their respective marriages. Their joy on this meeting was very great, as well it might be, since they had been contented to know nothing of each other for the last 15 years. Mrs. Thorpe had one great advantage as a talker over Mrs. Allen in a family of children, and when she had expatiated on the talents of her sons and the beauty of her daughters, Mrs. Allen had no similar information to give, no similar triumphs to press on the unwilling and unbelieving ear of her friend. She was forced, in fact, to sit and to appear to listen to all these maternal effusions, and to be introduced, along with Catherine, to the 3 Miss Thorpes, who proved to be sisters of a young man who was the same college as Catherine's brother James. James, indeed, had actually spent the last week of Christmas vacation with the family near London. The progress of the friendship was thus entered into by Catherine and Isabella. The eldest of the Miss Thorpes, who was quick at its beginning, was warm, and they passed so rapidly through every gradation of increasing tenderness there was shortly no fresh proof of it to be given to their friends and themselves. Indeed, they called each other by their Christian name. They were always arm in arm when they walked. They pinned up each other's train for the dance, and they were not to be divided in the set. And if a rainy morning deprived them of their other enjoyments, they were still resolute in meeting in defiance of wet and dirt, and shut themselves up to read novels together. One day, after they had been talking of Udolpho and of other horrid books and of their favourite complexion and man, they met Catherine's brother James and Isabella's brother John in a gig. On introduction, the latter proved to be a smart young man of middle height, who, with a plain face and ungraceful form, seemed fearful of being too handsome unless he wore the dress of a groom, and too much like a gentleman unless he were easy where he ought to be civil, and impudent where he might be allowed to be easy. James, of course, was attached to Isabella. "She has so much good sense," he said, "and is so thoroughly unaffected and amiable." Now, at the dance in the upper rooms, which took place on the evening of the same day, Mr. Tilney made his reappearance and introduced his sister to Catherine. Miss Tilney had a good figure, a pretty face, and a very agreeable countenance. Her air, though it had not all the decided pretension, the resolute stylishness of Miss Thorpe's, had more real elegance, and her manners showed better sense and better breeding overall. She seemed capable of being young and attractive at a ball without wanting to fix the attention of every man near her. Chapter 3. Catherine Morland among her friends. Now, unfixed as Catherine's general notions were of what a man ought to be, she could not entirely repress a doubt of Mr. John Thorpe's being altogether completely agreeable. A tattler and a swaggerer, having elicited, as he thought, from Catherine that she was the destined heiress of Mr. Allen, he twice endeavoured to detach her by a glaring lie from keeping engagements with the Tilneys, and when he did succeed in persuading her to go with him in his gig, she found that the whole of his talk ended with himself and his own concerns. Ah, yes, he told her of horses which he had bought for a trifle and sold for incredible sums. He told her of racing matches in which his judgment had infallibly foretold the winner. He told her of shooting parties in which he had killed more birds, though without having one single good shot, than all his companions together. And he described to her some famous days spent with the foxhounds, in which his foresight and skill in directing the dogs had repaired the mistakes of the most experienced huntsman, and in which the boldness of his riding, though it had never endangered his own life for a single moment, had been constantly leading others into difficulties which he calmly concluded had broken the necks of more than one person. As may be imagined, all this palaver rather wearied Catherine, not even his relating to her that Mr. Tilney's father, General Tilney, whom he was talking to one night at the theatre, had declared her the finest girl in Bath, the city, could reconcile her to the idea that Mr. John Thorpe had the faculty of giving universal pleasure. It was a visit which she paid to Miss Tilney to apologize for not keeping an engagement which Mr. John had caused her to break the first introduced her to the General. A handsome, stately, well-bred man with a temper that made him a martinet to his own children. He received her with a politeness and even a deference that delighted and surprised her. But whereas Catherine's simplicity of character made her growing attachment to Mr. Tilney obvious to that gentleman and to his sister, it was not so clear that he reciprocated her feelings. Generally, he amused himself by talking down to her or making fun of her in a good-natured way. One day they were speaking of Mrs. Radcliffe's works, and more particularly of the Mysteries of Udolpho. "As I have read all of Miss Radcliffe's works," said he, "and most of them with great pleasure." "Oh, I'm very glad to hear that indeed," replied Catherine, "and now I shall never be ashamed of liking Udolpho myself. But I really thought that young men despised novels amazingly." "Yes, it is amazingly. It may well suggest amazement if they do, for they read nearly as many as women do," was Mr. Tilney's answer. "I myself have read hundreds and hundreds of novels, and do not imagine that you can cope with me in a knowledge of Julias and Louisas. Consider how many years I've had the start of you, girl. I entered my studies at Oxford, while you were probably a good little girl working your sampler at home." "Not very good, I'm afraid. But now, really, do you not think Udolpho the nicest book in the world?" "Ha, ha, hey, the nicest, yes. By which I suppose you mean the neatest. That must depend on the binding, "Oh, I am sure," cried Catherine hastily. "I did not mean to say anything wrong, but it is a nice book, and why should I not call it so?" "Yes, it's very true," said Henry. "And this is a very nice day, isn't it? And we are all taking a very nice walk, aren't we? And you are two very nice young ladies." That was a very nice word indeed, for it does everything nice. Originally, perhaps, it was applied only to express neatness, propriety, delicacy, and refinement. People were nice in their dress, in their sentiments, or in their choices. But now every commendation on every subject is comprised in that one word, nice. Meanwhile, Catherine was required to interest herself in her friend's love affairs. Isabella surprised her one day with the news that she was engaged to her brother James, and obviously under the impression that her lover was the heir of a wealthy man, she seemed to wonder whether his parents would acquiesce in the engagement. But despite her affection for James, she danced with Mr. Tilney's elder brother, Captain Tilney, at a ball which was given while her betrothed was absent on the necessary visit to his parents. And when letters were received from him, announcing their consent to the match and the agreement of Mr. Morland to resign a living of £400 to his son and to bequeath to him by will an estate of the same value, Isabella looked grave at first on the smallness of that income, and then at the fact that it would be nearly 3 years before James would be old enough to take even that. Meantime, she continued to flirt rather openly with Captain Tilney, much to James' uneasiness and to his sister's distress. But Catherine was to some extent reassured as to the captain's conduct by his brother Henry, and she was so overjoyed by receiving an invitation from General Tilney to pay a visit to Northanger Abbey. Remember Northanger Abbey? It's a story about Northanger Abbey. Northanger Abbey, his beautiful country seat, the departing interview with Isabella and James, at which he was in excellent spirits and she was most engagingly placid, left her blissfully convinced that the behavior of the lovers was a model of judicious affection. Part 4. Romance at Northanger Abbey. The Tilney party set out for the Abbey in great state. The ladies and general's chaises and four, with postilions and numerous outriders, and the general and Henry and latter's curricle. But as the first stage, the general proposed that Catherine should take his place at the curricle, that she might see as much of the country as possible. And for the rest of the journey she was tete-a-tete with Henry, who amused himself by rallying her upon the sliding panels, the ghastly tapestries, the funereal beds, the vaulted chambers, and the kindred uncanny apparatus which, judging from Catherine's favourite kind of fiction, she must be expecting to find at Northanger Abbey. Now, as a matter of fact, Northanger Abbey, though it comprised some parts of the old abbey, turned out to be a building thoroughly modernized and improved. Notwithstanding, Catherine could not restrain her imagination from running a riot just a little. A large cedar chest, curiously inlaid and provided with silver handles, first attracted Catherine's attention, but this was soon found to contain merely a white cotton counterpane. A high old-fashioned ebony cabinet, which she noticed in her bedroom just before stepping into bed, struck Catherine as offering more promise of romantic interest. But even this, after a most thrilling search, in the midst of which her candle went out, yielded nothing better than an inventory of linen. Yet still, Catherine's passion for romance was not easily be disappointed. Hearing from Eleanor Tilney that her mother's fatal illness had been sudden and short and had taken place in her absence from home, Catherine's blood ran cold with the horrid suggestions that naturally sprang from these words. Could it be possible? Could Henry's father have... And yet, how many were the examples to justify even the blackest suspicions? And when Catherine saw him in the evening while she worked with her friend, slowly pacing the drawing room for an hour together in silent thoughtfulness with downcast eye and contracted brow, she felt secure from all possibility of wronging him. It was indeed the air and attitude of a Montoni. What could more plainly speak the gloomy workings of a mind not wholly dead to every sense of humanity and its fearful reviews of the past scenes of guilt? Full, then, of the idea that the general had ill-treated his wife, yea, killed her, ready even to believe that she might still be living and a prisoner, though, our heroine set out one day to explore a certain set of rooms into which the general, in showing her over the house, had not taken her. But Catherine was caught in the act by Henry Tilney, who revealed with customary openness what had been in her mind and received only a very gentle rebuke. Most grievously was Catherine humbled. Her folly, which now seemed even criminal, was all exposed to him, and he must surely despise her forever and ever. But Henry did nothing of the kind. His astonishing generosity and nobleness of conduct was such that the only difference he made in his behavior to her was to pay her somewhat more attention than usual. But the anxieties of common life began soon to succeed to the alarms of romance, and Catherine's desire of hearing from Isabella grew every day greater. For 9 successive mornings she wondered over the repetition of disappointment, and then on the 10th she got a letter, not from Isabella, but from James, announcing the breaking off of the engagement by mutual consent. At first she was much upset by the news and burst into tears, but in the end she saw it in a more philosophic light, so that before long Henry was able to rally her on her former bosom friendship with Miss Thorpe without offending her. And when a day or two later a letter arrived from Isabella containing amazing sentences, I am quite uneasy about your dear brother, not having heard from him since he went to Oxford, and am fearful of some misunderstanding. Your kind officers will set all right. He's the only man I ever did or ever could love, and I trust you will convince him of it. Catherine resolved, No. Whatever would happen, James should never hear Isabella's name mentioned by her again. And soon afterwards, a bolt fell from the blue. General Tilney, who had paid Catherine the most embarrassing attention, suddenly and unexpectedly returned from town, where he had gone for a day or two on business, and packed Catherine off home immediately, with hardly an apology and scarcely a moment's notice. He had met young Thorpe in town, it seemed, and John had this time underestimated the wealth and consequence of the Morlands as much as he had overstated them before when he talked to the general in the theatre at Bath. The rudeness of the general, however, proved not so very great a disaster to Catherine. The interest and liking which Henry had first felt for her had gradually grown into a warmer feeling, and roused to a sense of this by his father's tyrannical behavior, he presented himself to Catherine at Fullerton, proposed to her, and was accepted. It was not long before the general gave his consent, getting at last to a right understanding of Mr. Morland's circumstances, which he found would allow Catherine to have £3,000, and delighted by the recent marriage of his daughter Eleanor to a viscount, he agreed to the union. And so Henry and Catherine were married within a 12-month from the first day of their meeting.
Thank you for listening. Check our channel for many more stories. Visit our website at www.storylinkradio.com.